My sister accused me of SA to get me removed from our grandfather's multi-million-dollar will. My parents backed her lie. Until the executor asked for evidence and everything started falling apart in front of them. Hey, Reddit. I never thought I'd be one of those guys posting his life story on the internet, but here I am. What happened to me still feels surreal, like something out of a bad movie. Except it was my actual life, and I had to live through every second of it. I'm not looking for sympathy. I just need to get this out somewhere, and maybe someone going through something similar can learn from what I went through. I'm Caleb, 30 years old now, but this story really starts when I was 23, fresh out of trade school and working as an HVAC technician in a small city in Ohio. Not glamorous, but I was good at it. Honest work, decent pay, and I liked fixing things. There's something satisfying about making cold air come out of a vent when someone's sweating through a summer heat wave. People appreciate you when you solve their problems. That's more than I could say for how my family treated me. My family situation was complicated, but whose isn't? I had a younger sister named Whitney, 2 years younger than me. We weren't close growing up. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I was the quiet one, the one who stayed out of trouble but never really got noticed for it. If Whitney got a B on a test, my parents threw a celebration. If I got an A, I got a nod and a reminder not to get cocky. My parents, Linda and Frank, ran a small insurance office in town. They were comfortable, not rich, but they had this constant fixation on appearances. Everything had to look perfect from the outside, even when it wasn't. Sunday dinners, holiday cards, family photos where everyone smiled like we actually liked each other. The image mattered more than the reality. But the real center of our family, the person who actually held things together, was my grandfather, William. Grandpa Will, everyone called him. He started a commercial refrigeration company back in the 70s, built it from nothing into a regional powerhouse serving restaurants, hospitals, and grocery chains across 3 states. He sold it 15 years ago for what I later learned was just north of $8 million. He invested wisely, lived modestly in the same house he'd had for 40 years, drove a 10-year-old truck, and by the time I was in my early 20s, his estate was worth somewhere around $12 million. Grandpa Will was the only person in my family who actually saw me. When I was a kid, while my parents were busy shuttling Whitney to dance recitals and pageants, Grandpa would pick me up and take me to his workshop. He noticed when I showed interest in mechanical work, encouraged me to pursue HVAC, even helped pay for my certification courses when my parents said trade school was settling for less. He used to say, "Caleb, people who work with their hands build the world everyone else just lives in. Doctors can't heal anyone if the hospital's AC breaks down in July." That stuck with me. It shaped who I became. While Whitney was getting her communications degree and posting photos of sorority formals, I was learning how to diagnose compressor failures and wire thermostat systems. My parents thought I was wasting my potential. Grandpa thought I was finding it. When I turned 23, about 6 months before everything fell apart, Grandpa Will sat me down privately during one of our Sunday dinners. Everyone else was inside watching football, but he pulled me out to the back porch with 2 cups of coffee and that look in his eye that said he had something important to say. "Caleb, I've been thinking a lot about the future lately," he said, staring out at his garden. "I'm 83 years old. I've had a good run, but I need to make sure things are handled right when I'm gone." I didn't like hearing him talk like that, but I listened. "I've been updating my will," he continued, "and I want you to know that you're going to inherit the bulk of my estate. Not because I don't love your sister or your parents, but because I've watched this family for a long time, and I know who has the character to handle responsibility." I was floored. I started to protest, telling him I didn't need that much, that he should split it more evenly. He raised a hand to stop me. "Whitney has a spending problem," he said bluntly. "She's never worked a real job in her life, and your parents have enabled her every step of the way. If I leave her millions, she'll burn through it in 5 years and blame everyone but herself. Your parents aren't much better. They've always cared more about looking successful than actually being successful." He turned to look at me directly. "But you, Caleb, you've got something they don't. You've got integrity. You understand that money is a tool, not a trophy. I'm leaving you the lion's share because I trust you to be the steward of this family's future. You'll take care of them even when they don't deserve it. That's the kind of man you are." I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, holding my coffee, feeling the weight of what he was telling me. "I'm not asking you to do anything," he said. "I'm just telling you so you're prepared. My lawyer Howard has all the documents. It's done. I just wanted you to hear it from me first." We sat in silence for a while after that. Then he patted my shoulder, and we went back inside like nothing had happened. I made the mistake of telling my parents. I know. Looking back, it was stupid. But I genuinely thought they'd be proud that Grandpa saw something in me. I thought it might actually improve how they treated me, knowing that I had his trust. About a month later, during a family dinner at my parents' house, I mentioned casually that Grandpa had updated his will and that he'd told me I'd be receiving a larger portion because he trusted me to manage things responsibly. I didn't give specifics. I didn't mention amounts. I just said he'd decided to structure things a certain way. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw tightened. Whitney, who happened to be visiting that weekend, looked at me like I'd stolen something from her. That's not fair, Whitney said immediately, setting down her fork. I'm his grandchild, too. Why would he do that? I tried to explain that it wasn't about fairness. It was about responsibility. Grandpa wanted someone who wouldn't blow through the money in a few years. Someone who understood the value of what he'd built. But Whitney didn't hear any of that. All she heard was that her brother was getting millions while she was getting less. Her face twisted into something ugly for just a second before she smoothed it back into hurt confusion. He must not know the real you, she said quietly. I should have paid more attention to that comment. I should have seen it for the threat it was. That conversation planted a seed that would grow into the worst nightmare of my life. 6 months later, Grandpa Will passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 84, had lived a full life, and went out on his own terms. The hospice nurse said he looked peaceful when she found him, like he'd just decided it was time to go. The funeral was packed. People came from 3 states to pay their respects. Old business partners, employees who'd worked for him decades ago, friends from the VFW, neighbors he'd helped over the years. The church was standing room only. I gave one of the eulogies, talking about how he taught me that hard work and integrity were the only currencies that mattered, how he'd believed in me when no one else did, how he'd shaped the man I became. Whitney sat in the front row with my parents, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, sniffling loudly enough for everyone to hear. Looking back now, I wonder if those tears were real or if she was already planning what came next. After the service, people kept coming up to me, shaking my hand, telling me stories about Grandpa I'd never heard. A restaurant owner he'd given a discount to when they were struggling. A single mom whose broken freezer he'd fixed for free. A young guy he'd mentored who now ran his own business. That was the kind of man he was. Quiet generosity. No fanfare. Just doing the right thing because it was right. The reading of the will was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. Grandpa's lawyer, a man named Howard Benson, handled everything. He was old school, meticulous, the kind of guy who dotted every I and crossed every T. He'd been Grandpa's attorney for 30 years and knew where all the bodies were buried, so to speak. The day before the reading, my phone rang. It was my mother, and her voice was ice cold. Caleb, we need to talk. Come to the house. Now. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. I drove over, confused and a little anxious. When I walked through the front door, I found my parents and Whitney sitting in the living room, like they were waiting for an execution. The blinds were drawn. Whitney wouldn't look at me. My mother was crying. My father stood by the window, arms crossed, face red with barely contained rage. What's going on? I asked, looking between them. My mother stood up slowly, her hands shaking. Whitney told us everything. Told you what? And then my father turned around, and the look in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. Pure hatred. Pure disgust. Like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. She told us what you did to her, he said, his voice barely controlled. When she was 15. When you were 17. In this house. In her bedroom. My brain short-circuited. The words didn't make sense. I literally couldn't process what he was saying. What are you talking about? I asked. Whitney finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I couldn't keep it inside anymore, she sobbed. Not after what Grandpa did. Not after knowing you're going to get everything. You don't deserve that money, Caleb. Not after what you did to me. I stood there, frozen. My own sister was accusing me of something I hadn't done. Something I would never do. Something so monstrous I couldn't even form words to respond. That never happened, I finally said, my voice steady even though my insides were collapsing. Whitney, why are you saying this? Don't you dare call her a liar, my father roared, stepping toward me. She told us everything. The details. Where? When? How you threatened her to keep quiet all these years. My mother was sobbing now, clutching a tissue. How could you, Caleb? She's your sister. Your own sister. I looked at Whitney, searching her face for some sign that this was a joke, some twisted prank gone wrong. But all I saw was conviction. She'd committed to this lie completely. Mom, I said, turning to her. You know me. You've known me my whole life. You know I would never— I don't know anything anymore, she whispered. My daughter is sitting here crying, telling me her brother violated her, and you want me to believe you? Yes, I said simply, because it didn't happen. My father grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. Get out of this house. Don't come to the reading tomorrow. Don't come anywhere near this family. If you show your face, I'll call the police myself and tell them exactly what kind of monster you are. I stood my ground for a moment, looking at each of them. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My father was red-faced and trembling with rage, and Whitney sat there, crying tears that weren't real, playing the victim role like she'd rehearsed it 100 times. I pulled my arm free. You're making a mistake, I said quietly. And when the truth comes out, you're going to have to live with what you did today. Then I walked out. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall, trying to figure out what had just happened. The accusation was so absurd, so completely disconnected from reality, that part of me kept expecting to wake up from a nightmare. My own sister had accused me of something monstrous to cut me out of Grandpa's will, and my parents had believed her without even asking me a single question, without wanting to hear my side, without a shred of evidence. They just believed her because it was easier than believing me. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there in the dark, thinking about Grandpa Will, wondering what he would say if he could see what was happening to the family he'd worked so hard to provide for. The next morning, I did something my father told me not to do. I showed up at the reading of the will. I wasn't going to let Whitney's lies erase me from my grandfather's final wishes. He'd trusted me. He'd believed in me. The least I could do was be there. Howard Benson's office was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building downtown, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't been renovated since 1975, but felt respectable because of it. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, law books lining the walls. When I walked in, my family was already seated. Whitney gasped when she saw me, like I was some kind of threat. My mother clutched her purse to her chest. My father stood up immediately, his face going red. I told you not to come here, he said through clenched teeth. And I'm here anyway, I replied calmly, taking a seat across from them. Because this is my grandfather's will, and I have every right to be present. Howard Benson looked between us, clearly sensing something was wrong. He was a tall man, with silver hair and sharp eyes, the kind of lawyer who'd seen everything and wasn't easily surprised. Is there a problem? He asked. My father opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. No problem, Mr. Benson. Please proceed. Howard studied us for a moment longer, then nodded and opened the folder in front of him. The reading went exactly as Grandpa had told me it would. The house, which was worth about $400,000, went to a local charity that helped veterans find housing. Various personal items were distributed to friends and extended family, things like his truck, his tools, photo albums, mementos. My parents received $200,000 each. Whitney received $150,000, and I received the residual estate, including all investments, accounts, and remaining assets, valued at approximately $11.4 million. The room went dead silent. Whitney's face twisted into something ugly. The mask slipped completely, and for just a second, I saw pure rage in her eyes. My mother started crying again. My father slammed his hand on Howard's desk hard enough to make the pens rattle. This is wrong, he said loudly. There's been a mistake. Howard Benson looked at him calmly, completely unruffled. I assure you, Mr. Reynolds, there's no mistake. William was very specific about his wishes. He updated this will 3 times over the past 5 years, and each version maintained the same distribution. I have copies of every revision if you'd like to review them. He didn't know, Whitney suddenly blurted out, her voice rising. He didn't know what Caleb did to me. If he had known, he never would have left him anything. He would have left everything to me. Howard Benson's eyebrows raised slightly. I'm sorry, what are you referring to? My father jumped in, his voice hard. Our daughter has recently disclosed that Caleb sexually assaulted her when they were teenagers. We believe this information would have changed William's decision about the estate. The lawyer was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he folded his hands on the desk. These are extremely serious allegations, he said carefully. If there's credible evidence of criminal conduct, that could potentially be grounds for a legal challenge to the estate distribution. However, I should inform you that William anticipated family disputes might arise after his passing. He left explicit instructions for how to handle them. He pulled out another document, a separate envelope with Grandpa's handwriting on it. William specified that any challenge to the will must be accompanied by verifiable evidence reviewed by an independent party before any distributions are altered or delayed. He also included a no contest clause, meaning that any beneficiary who challenges the will and loses forfeits their inheritance entirely. My father's face paled. What do you mean, evidence? Police reports, court records, medical documentation, witness statements under oath, something substantive and verifiable. Howard looked directly at Whitney. Miss Reynolds, did you ever report this alleged assault to authorities? Whitney's confidence flickered for the first time. No, I was scared. He threatened me. Are there any witnesses? Any documentation at all? A diary entry, a text message, anything? No, but that doesn't mean... Then I'm afraid without evidence there's nothing actionable here. The estate will be distributed according to William's wishes. Howard closed the folder. I should also mention that if you pursue a challenge without substantive evidence and lose, you forfeit the $150,000 William left you. Whitney's face went white. My parents looked at each other, clearly not having expected this. This isn't right, my mother said weakly. He would have wanted to know. He would have changed his mind. Howard Benson's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Mrs. Reynolds, I've known William for 30 years. He was one of the most thorough, thoughtful people I've ever worked with. He spent months considering how to structure this estate. He consulted with financial advisors, estate planners, and me. He knew exactly what he was doing. He paused. And frankly, if you'll forgive me for saying so, he anticipated something like this might happen. What's that supposed to mean? My father demanded. It means William knew his family very well. He structured this will specifically to protect his wishes from challenges based on last-minute accusations without proof. He told me, and I quote, "If there's drama after I'm gone, make sure the truth wins." That's what I'm doing. Whitney exploded. You can't just ignore what I'm telling you. He assaulted me, my own brother. Howard Benson remained completely calm. I'm not ignoring anything, Miss Reynolds. I'm simply following the legal framework your grandfather established. If you have evidence to support your claims, I encourage you to pursue appropriate legal channels. File a police report. Press charges. Have your day in court. But accusations alone cannot alter a legal document. My father stood up, knocking his chair backward. This isn't over. We'll get our own lawyer. We'll contest this in court. We'll expose him for what he really is. Howard nodded. That's your right. But I'd advise you to remember the no contest clause. And I'd advise you to remember that courts require evidence, not just accusations. They stormed out without looking at me. Whitney shot me one last glare as she passed, her mask completely gone now. What I saw behind it wasn't hurt or trauma. It was fury. The fury of someone whose plan had just hit an unexpected wall. I stayed behind to shake Howard Benson's hand. Your grandfather was a wise man, he said quietly after they'd gone. He knew something like this might happen. That's why he built in those protections. He saw things other people didn't, I said. Yes, he did. Howard looked at me with something like respect. He saw you, Caleb. He told me once that you were the only member of his family who'd never disappointed him. He said everyone else wanted something from him, but you just wanted to spend time with him. I had to look away for a second. That hit harder than I expected. The estate transfer will take a few weeks, Howard continued, but the money is yours. William made sure of that. And Caleb, for what it's worth, I don't believe a word of what your sister said in there. I've been doing this for 40 years. I know what real trauma looks like, and I know what a fabrication looks like. That was a fabrication. I nodded. Thank you, Mr. Benson. Call me Howard. Your grandfather did. The next few months were brutal. More brutal than I ever could have anticipated. Even though I'd been cleared at the reading, my family launched a full campaign to destroy me. My parents called every relative we had, every family friend, every neighbor who'd known us since I was a kid. They painted me as a monster, someone who'd hidden his true nature for years, someone who'd fooled everyone including Grandpa Will. My mother apparently sobbed on the phone to her sister for 2 hours about how she'd failed to protect Whitney and how she'd had a predator living under her roof. My father told his buddies at the bowling alley that he should have seen the signs and that he felt sick knowing what his son really was. Whitney took to social media like it was her job. She posted vague things about surviving trauma and family betrayal, and finally speaking my truth. She wrote long posts about how silence protects abusers, and how sometimes the people closest to you are the most dangerous. She never named me directly, but everyone in our small social circle knew exactly who she was talking about. The comments were full of support, hundreds of people telling her how brave she was, how strong she was, how they believed her. People I'd known my whole life were suddenly convinced I was capable of something horrific. Old friends stopped returning my calls. Guys I'd played basketball with in high school would cross the street when they saw me coming. Coworkers started giving me weird looks and finding excuses not to ride with me to job sites. My boss, a decent guy named Gerald, who'd always treated me fairly, pulled me aside one afternoon with an uncomfortable look on his face. "Caleb, I've been getting calls," he said. "Anonymous calls. People asking why I employ someone with your history." My stomach dropped. "Gerald, none of it's true. My sister made it up because of a family inheritance dispute. I can explain everything." He held up a hand. "You don't have to explain anything to me. I've known you for 3 years. You're one of the best technicians I've ever had. I'm not firing you over rumors." I exhaled, relief flooding through me. "But," he continued, "I'm going to have to keep you on internal work for a while. Back office stuff, inventory, equipment maintenance, training new guys. I can't send you into people's homes right now. If word gets around and someone complains, it could tank the business." It wasn't fair, but I understood. I spent the next 4 months doing work that bored me to tears, all because my sister decided to lie. The isolation was suffocating. I'd go to work, come home, stare at the walls, eat something microwaved, sleep badly, repeat. There were nights I'd sit in my apartment wondering if maybe I should just give them the money, let them have it, walk away and start over somewhere no one knew my name. I even drove to the state line once, middle of the night, thinking about just keeping going, disappearing, starting fresh with a new identity and no family baggage. But I stopped at a rest area and sat in my truck for an hour, and I thought about Grandpa, about what he'd wanted, about why he'd trusted me, about what he'd say if he could see me running away from a fight I hadn't started. I could hear his voice in my head. "Caleb, you don't run from lies, you outlast them. The truth always surfaces. Your job is to be standing when it does." And I remembered that giving in to liars doesn't make the lies stop. It just teaches them that lying works. So I turned around and drove home. I held on, day by day, week by week, month by agonizing month. I documented everything. Every social media post Whitney made, I screenshot it with timestamps. Every time someone cut me off or refused to speak to me, I wrote it down. Every weird look from a coworker, every whispered conversation that stopped when I walked in, I recorded. I didn't know what I'd use it for, but Grandpa always said, "A man who doesn't keep records is a man who can't prove anything." What I didn't expect was how the truth would finally come out. About 6 months after the reading, Whitney made a fatal mistake. She filed for a restraining order against me, claiming I'd been following her, showing up at her apartment, making threats. It was another lie, designed to build a paper trail for a future legal challenge to the will. But to get a restraining order, you have to appear in court. You have to make statements under oath. And in court, there are lawyers asking questions. My attorney, a sharp woman named Diane, who'd been recommended by Howard Benson, prepared for that hearing like it was a murder trial. She subpoenaed Whitney's phone records, her social media history, her internet search history, and her financial records. What she found was damning. 2 weeks before Whitney first accused me, she'd sent a text message to her best friend that read, "Grandpa left almost everything to Caleb. Can you believe that garbage? I need to figure out a way to contest it. Maybe I can say he did something to me when we were kids? Who would question that?" Her friend's response, "That's genius. No one would ever question it. Play the victim and the money's yours." Diane also found that Whitney had Googled how to contest a will. Statute of limitations on assault. Can an accusation without evidence change inheritance? And false memory implantation in the days following Grandpa's death. She'd also opened 3 new credit cards and charged almost $25,000 in the 6 months after the reading, clearly anticipating she'd eventually get her hands on millions. The restraining order hearing turned into a disaster for Whitney. Diane presented the evidence methodically, piece by piece, letting each item speak for itself. The text messages planning the accusation, the search history showing premeditation. The timeline that proved Whitney's accusation came only after she learned about the will distribution, not before. Whitney's lawyer tried to object, tried to redirect, tried to explain away each piece, but there was too much. The picture was too clear. The judge, an older woman named Henderson, who'd clearly seen plenty of family disputes in her career, wasn't just skeptical. She was visibly angry. "Miss Reynolds," she said, her voice cold as ice, "the evidence presented here strongly suggests your allegations against your brother were fabricated specifically for financial gain. Not only am I denying this restraining order, I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges, including perjury, filing a false report, and attempted fraud." Whitney's face went white as paper. My parents, sitting behind her in the gallery, looked like they'd been hit by a truck. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm sorry you've had to endure this. The court system exists to pursue justice, not to be weaponized for personal vendettas. What your sister attempted to do to you is despicable, and I hope the relevant authorities pursue appropriate consequences. I just nodded. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired, bone-deep exhausted from months of fighting a battle I should never have had to fight. The fallout was swift and merciless. The district attorney did file charges against Whitney. The text messages alone were enough for fraud charges, and her statements under oath in the restraining order petition added perjury to the list. Her lawyer tried to negotiate, tried to argue that she'd been confused and emotionally overwhelmed by grief over Grandpa's death, but the DA wasn't buying it. Cases like this, where someone uses false accusations as a weapon, they wanted to make an example. The local news picked up the story, not as a huge headline, but enough that people started talking, enough that the narrative began to shift. Suddenly, I wasn't the monster everyone had been warned about. I was the victim of a scheming sister who'd lied for money. People who'd avoided me for months started reaching out. A coworker named Dennis, who'd been distant, sent me a text that just said, "Sorry, man. Believed the wrong person." Gerald put me back on regular service calls. Old friends called and stammered through awkward apologies. I didn't blame them, not really. Whitney had been convincing. My parents had backed her up. When your own family is accusing you, people tend to believe them. That's just how it works. But I also didn't pretend everything was fine. Some relationships were damaged beyond repair. Some people had said things that couldn't be unsaid. I accepted apologies when they were sincere, but I also learned who my real friends were and who had just been fair-weather acquaintances. Whitney ended up pleading guilty to a lesser charge to avoid trial. She received 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent mark on her record that would follow her forever. The judge made it clear that any violation of probation would result in immediate jail time. I was in the courtroom when she entered her plea. She wouldn't look at me. Her lawyer did all the talking, while she stood there with her head down, probably trying to look remorseful for the judge. My parents weren't there. I guess even they couldn't stomach watching their golden child admit to what she'd done. Afterward, in the parking lot, Whitney's lawyer approached me. "My client wanted me to tell you she's sorry," he said, looking uncomfortable. I looked past him to where Whitney was getting into her car. She glanced up for just a second, and our eyes met. "Tell your client that sorry doesn't give me back the 6 months of my life she stole," I said. "Tell her sorry doesn't undo what she put me through. Tell her that if she ever comes near me again, the restraining order won't be the one she filed." The lawyer nodded and walked away. I never spoke to Whitney again after that. As far as I'm concerned, I'm an only child now. My parents tried to distance themselves from the whole thing. Suddenly they were shocked by Whitney's actions. Suddenly they'd been manipulated by her lies. Suddenly they wanted to reconnect with their son, now that the truth was out. But Howard Benson had one more card to play. He produced another document, a letter Grandpa Will had written to be opened only if there was a dispute over the estate. He'd given it to Howard with instructions to use it at his discretion. Howard read it aloud in his office, with just me present. "To whoever is reading this," the letter began, "if Howard is sharing this, it means my family has shown their true colors. I want to explain why I made the choices I made. My son Frank and his daughter-in-law Linda have always prioritized appearance over substance. They raised Whitney to believe she was entitled to things she hadn't earned, and they failed to see the quiet strength in Caleb. I love them, but I don't trust them. I fear that if I leave them significant wealth, they will squander it and blame everyone but themselves. Caleb is different. He's worked for everything he has. He understands that money is responsibility, not reward. He has the character to build something lasting and the integrity to take care of family even when they don't deserve it. If my family is fighting over this estate, if accusations are being made, if people are showing sides of themselves I always suspected but hoped I was wrong about, then I want Caleb to know this. I chose him because he earned it, not through flattery or manipulation, but through being the kind of man I always hoped my family would produce. Son, take care of them anyway, not because they deserve it, but because that's who you are. And know that wherever I am, I'm proud of you." I had to stop reading after that. Howard handed me a glass of water and waited. "He knew," I finally said. "He knew they might do something like this." "He suspected," Howard said. "He didn't want to believe it, but he prepared for it." That's the kind of man he was. A year after the hearing, I finally had full control of the estate. The transfers were complete. The investments were consolidated. Howard helped me set up the structure Grandpa had recommended, trusts and accounts that would preserve the wealth rather than deplete it. I kept working as an HVAC technician. I liked the work. It kept me grounded. And honestly, after everything I'd been through, I needed normal more than I needed luxury. But I also did something Grandpa would have wanted. Something I knew was the right thing to do, even though part of me didn't want to. I set up a trust that would provide for my parents if they ever truly needed it. Medical emergencies, housing if they lost their home, basic necessities if they fell on hard times. They'd never be rich from it, but they wouldn't suffer either. I didn't tell them about it. I didn't want thanks or reconciliation. I just did it because Grandpa had asked me to take care of family, even when they didn't deserve it. Some people never learn. 3 years have passed since then. I'm 29 now. A year after getting full control of the estate, I started my own HVAC company. Nothing huge at first, just me and 2 guys I'd worked with before who I knew I could trust. We called it Reynolds Climate Solutions. Within 18 months, we had more work than we could handle, and I hired 3 more technicians. Word of mouth spread fast once people realized we showed up on time, did the job right, and didn't gouge anyone on pricing. I bought a house outside of town. 3 bedrooms, nice yard, quiet street. Fixed most of it up myself. I met Julia at a job site. Her veterinary clinic needed a new cooling system for their surgical suite, and I handled the install personally. She had 2 rescue dogs, a no-nonsense attitude, and she laughed at my terrible jokes. We got coffee after the job was done. Then dinner. Then more dinners. 6 months in, I told her everything. The accusation, the trial, the family I'd lost. She listened without interrupting, then said, "So, when do I get to meet Howard? He sounds like good people." We got married last spring. Small ceremony, 40 people, botanical garden outside the city. Howard Benson was there. So were some of Grandpa's old friends who'd reached out after everything went public. My coworkers came. Julia's family came. My family wasn't invited. The wedding gift from Howard was a framed photo of Grandpa Will I'd never seen before. Him at maybe 40 years old, standing in front of his first service truck, grinning like he'd just conquered the world. On the back, Howard had written, "He would have loved her. Whitney burned through her inheritance in 18 months. Designer clothes, a trip to Europe, and a boyfriend named Kevin who drove a leased BMW and talked about cryptocurrency. Kevin disappeared 3 weeks after the money ran out. Whitney moved back in with my parents. Last I heard, she's working as a receptionist at a dental office. Her probation ended, but the conviction stays on her record. She tried to get it expunged. The judge said no. My parents' insurance business started struggling about 2 years ago. Turns out their reputation took a hit when the truth came out about what they'd done to me. People in small towns have long memories. A few of their biggest clients quietly took their business elsewhere. Last month, I got a letter from my mother. No return address, but I recognized her handwriting. My father had been diagnosed with heart disease. They were drowning in medical bills. Insurance wasn't covering everything. She asked if I could help. She said they were sorry. She said they missed me. She said they'd made mistakes. I showed the letter to Julia. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I picked up the phone and called the administrator of the trust I'd set up 3 years ago, the one my parents didn't know existed. I authorized full coverage for my father's medical treatment. Surgery, recovery, medication, whatever he needed. Then I threw the letter away. 2 weeks later, a hospital billing coordinator called my mother to tell her that an anonymous benefactor had covered all of my father's medical expenses. She called Howard Benson's office 17 times trying to find out who it was. He didn't return the calls. My father had his surgery last week. Triple bypass. He's recovering. My mother posted on social media about God's mysterious blessings and angels watching over them. I saw the post because Julia showed me. I just shrugged and went back to working on a quote for a new commercial client. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.